Hi all, I'd like to run through with you, just for an aesthetic experience, I'd like to show you 8 of what I consider the greatest Fischer sacrifices and combinations throughout his career. Now the first one I'd like to show you when he was just 13 years old, and he just played a check against Donald Byrne in the 3rd Rosenwald Trophy, played in New York, United States. So check, and now we see the king moving to f1, and I think it was expected that Fischer would just move his queen here. And actually, let's put on the Kibitzer. If Fischer had moved his queen, then I think white stands quite well after queen takes c3. There's a clear advantage. But instead, Fischer played bishop e6, and this is a remarkable queen sacrifice here. And white now played bishop takes b6, and what we see is bishop takes c4 check, and now another check on e2, and here knight takes d4 check. So there's a seesaw of checks here. King g1, knight e2 check, king f1. Now knight c3 check, very strongly placed knight there. After king g1, now a takes b, getting a bit more material. Queen b4, and now a beautiful move, protecting the bishop again with tempo now. Rook a4, offering the b6 pawn. Now knight takes d1, so black has a shed load of material for the queen. And the game continued like this. Donald Byrne was a good sport, I think, to just continue playing with such a material deficit. Fischer just started coordinating his extra pieces. After bishop c5 check, the king is caught in a mating net, basically, unescapable mating net. And Donald Byrne, a good sport, allows the checkmate. So that was the game of the century. I think that's, from an aesthetic point of view, made a great impression on many people. So that's the first one I'd like to show you of 8. Now this position is taken from Fischer again, showing in 1957, so still a very young Fischer. White had taken on c3, black now took back on c3, unsuspecting Fischer's next move. There's a really good move here for white, very powerful, which guarantees at least a small advantage, but black underestimated white's resources. Fischer actually played rook. It's a rook move. Can you guess it if I give you 10 seconds? Rook move or capture, I should say. Okay, it was rook takes f7, and the remarkable thing about this is that maybe Schoen thought he'd be refuting it with this rook c1 check. So now if Fischer had played rook f1 here, then black is miles better by playing king h8, and actually the queen is protecting c1. This is a very important point. So this rook can't do anything, it's pinned. But no, Fischer's idea, and this put a great smile on his face, and as we can see Fischer's smile video on this channel, I'll give you links to all of the detailed games, but queen f1, and he put this on the demo board and he's smiling, queen f1, and this is the move which is really decisive. Now black is being crushed here. Doesn't matter what black does. Queen takes d5, we just play rook takes f8 mate. Rook takes f1, we just play rook takes f1 check, discover check. And now if rook f7 here, rook a8 is mating after queen d8, we just take the queen off. So there's absolutely nothing black can do after queen f1, it seems. Engine suggests there's nothing. Black's best, just for those interested, would have been to play something like h5 or h6 to minimise the damage. Just not this disastrous rook c1, but which was played. So a beautiful move, rook takes f7, though to see that, and to see the resource queen f1 in particular here, is amazing. Let's look at another game now. From New York City, 1963, this time, against Robert Eugene Byrne. Fischer had just played knight d3. He had had an isolated queen's pawn during this game. This game is also annotated in detail on this channel. Now Robert played a routine sort of move, maybe threatening to get two pieces of the rook now, queen c2, not estimating black's reply, not properly estimating the strength of it. Maybe he thought, you know, Fischer was about to lose. Other commentators during the game thought Fischer's isolated queen's pawn is like a losing liability. You know, if the knight went back, then white's just clearly better because of this isolated queen's pawn. We move like knight f4. So Fischer had to play something different. He plays this shattering knight takes f2. I remember using a similar sacrifice to win a tournament in real life, the Halifax under 160, when I was below 160 many years back as a junior. I remember this pattern because it shatters the pawn structure around the king. So king takes f2, knight g4 check, king g1, knight takes e3, and the beautiful thing here after queen d2 is, again, it was expected that was the purpose of this knight takes d1, then white would still be, you know, in the driving seat after rook takes d1, slightly better. But here is the start of a second amazing part of the combination, amazing feature coming next. Knight takes g2, just shattering white's king safety on the light squares, not going for the rook. And now we see the strength of d4. This bishop's coming back to this diagonal. Knight takes d4 check, king f1, and now just a little delicate move to finish things off, queen d7, and there's no defense for white here. For example, knight f3, queen h3 check, queen g2. We can take this and take on c3. This is winning for black. There's no real defense here. If king g1, queen h3 threatens now bishop takes d4 and mating on g2. You know, if knight d5, you know, bishop takes d5, that just delays things. It's not, you know, what does white do here after queen h3? If queen f2, here's a spectacular variation. Rook e1 check, trying to deflect the queen away from g2. And if rook takes e1, then bishop takes d4. Again, we're distracting the queen away from g2. So it's a horrendous position with the light square weaknesses. Nothing really white can do about this. So a beautiful combination there. Just when a lot of commentators thought, you know, black was strategically in problems here with the isolated queen's pawn. This shattering combination, not with the idea of getting the rook, but with the bishop. Beautiful combination there. A great impression was made on many people, including me, of this particular sacrifice on f2. So that was in 1963. Let's see now. Go back to 1960 against René Letelier Markner. So Fischer was playing black, and this was actually the very first game I annotated on the channel. Fischer's King's Indian game, I think, against Letelier. So white had just played now. Sorry, after rook a e8, doubling on e3, white protects now f3. His game's in a bad way actually, but the spectacular way of finishing the game here. Can you see what Fischer played if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay. Fischer played rook takes e3. He draws the king out after rook takes e3. And you might wonder, what's the king doing here? Okay, how does black exploit this? Was it to do with check? That is quite lucrative and offers black a good position. But actually a more spectacular move, can you guess it, than queen b6 check? Okay, it was actually queen takes f4 and white resigned here. So why did white resign? If king takes f4, then bishop h6 is mate. So it's a nice drag and drop for the king. If king e2, that looks horrendous for knight d4 check. And actually it's a forced mate here. After knight takes f3, white's getting mated. If king f2, that doesn't help because of knight g4 check using the pin. Knight e3 check, it's still a forced mate after knight d4. And if white, how can white defend? What does he play? Queen h1, say knight g4 check, and then knight takes f3. Black is crashing through. So it's a really bone crushing move. Queen takes f4, causing white to resign. So that was in the Leipzig Olympiad preliminary in Germany, 1960, 24th of October 1960. Now let's go to the classic 1972 match of Reykjavik in Iceland, midway between USSR and United States. Fischer had played this game in a beautiful manner to reach this very dangerous position for black. It's a lost position actually for black. Boris Spassky is faced with rook f8 check, mating him on h7, because if takes, queen h7. Pardon me, the queen's not on h7 yet. After queen e4, the threat is now rook f8 check. After takes, then we're mating on h7. Just to demonstrate that, if say rook b7, just to show rook f8, let's show it on the board. So that's the threat. So Spassky, his position's on his last legs anyway. He plays knight f6, and it's logical now just to sacrifice the exchange. It further weakens black's king, even though temporarily Fischer's laying apparent defense on h7. This doesn't help for too long. Things are crumbling around the king here. Fischer now played the calm, believe it or not, bishop c4. This is actually, bishop c4 is actually one of the strongest engine moves, even potentially stronger than rook takes h6. Apparently, no, they're all pretty strong moves. I mean, this is pretty strong as well. It's pretty crushing. There are too many threats for black to deal with. For example, just queen e5 and rook h8 coming up. But instead, we see a very calm bishop c4, maintaining lots of threats like queen f4 and rook takes h6. Black tries now king h8. And now instead of rook takes h6, I think this is good for white anyway, this position, even here, because we've got things like e7. This is crushing as well, even the exchange down. But Fischer actually played just queen f4, and here it's actually a forced mate, much more incisive actually. It's a forced mate here, whatever black does in 7. For example, rook h7, there's rook f8. If queen g8, well, there's rook f8. So that battery here that's created with queen f4, smashing down that f file, is absolutely crushing. And if king g8 protecting f8, rook takes h6, and now the threat is queen g3 and then e7, unleashing the bishop on this diagonal. So the bishop's not just there to protect the pawn, it's to be unleashed potentially in the variations. And black is absolutely helpless here. If rook takes e6, queen f6 using the pin, threatening rook h8. If rook g7, we can just take here, it's crushing, winning the queen, etc. So it was a logical, the work had been done prior to this sacrifice though. It has to be emphasised that this was already a winning position, but it was a nice artistic climax to earlier play. So now let me take you to the SUS interzonal tournament of 1967. Fischer was playing against Lemerson Magimerson. That's the closest pronunciation I'll get. So here Fischer has got a great position, but it looks as though black has got some dangerous queenside play. If white plays a move like rook c1, then black technically is going to be doing, you know, potentially okay. It's a very precarious position though, indeed, because of white's placement of pieces around black's king. It's very difficult. Bishop d3, apparently, you know, white's doing okay here after bishop d3. But so rook c1 is not needed. There's an absolutely incisive winning move here instead. Just going for it with queen h6, which seemingly allows the queen to be repulsed with queen f8. But the unexpected, tale of the unexpected here. Can you guess what Fischer played? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, the queen does not want to go back here. If the queen goes back here, then actually black will be in the driving seat with knight b3. For example, this H file, we can just play FG and we're actually protecting H7. Nope, that's not the idea at all. Queen takes H7. Beautiful idea, giving up the queen. If king takes H7, HG, and now if king G8, then we've got rook H8, mate. If the king takes here, then the bishop makes an entrance with bishop E4, checkmate. So a beautiful idea for this queen H6, for queen H7 here. Okay, let me show you another game. 1961 against the great Mikhail Tal, the magician from Riga. Fischer, in this position, this was played in Bled, Yugoslavia, 1961, April the 9th. Bishop D3 was played, seemingly allowing the queen to be in a little bit of trouble, or to swap herself with Tal's queen, because Tal played E5. Now Fischer had just played the routine queen takes E5. Then this might still be okay actually for white, this position. The engine still likes white's position a bit, but Fischer played an even stronger move technically. Fischer played F takes E5, spectacularly giving up the queen to have a protected pawn there. After rook takes, E takes, and now a dangerous threat of getting the two rooks, which I don't think black can do much about. So queen C5, bishop takes H7, Fischer gets the two rooks. Rook HF1, so okay, the pawns have gone, but from this position, Fischer was able to now coordinate. Bishop takes D7, gets rid of the bishop, so we have a pure situation with the two rooks against the queen. And Fischer showed this is indeed a winning position. Black is running out of pawns, and all the pawns mopped up now, so the game wasn't too hard to convert eventually into a win. After rook A6, Mikhail Tal resigned, but the aesthetic impression for me was huge seeing this game. I think in Bobby Fischer's 60 memorable games, but he just sacrificed the queen here to get the two rooks. Wonderful stuff. Now, I think this is the 8th combination that I'd like to show you. So against Palbenko, Palbenko had apparently a sleepless night. I think he was out with a girl the night before. That was his excuse after this game, anyway. And his poke defense seems to backfire here. Fischer played bishop takes, sorry, after queen E8. It looks as though Palbenko is trying to play F5 and swap off the queens. Is the queen going to be repulsed back? Yeah. Bishop takes D4 was played after E takes D4. The idea is not knight E2. This would be passive, and black would be getting away with F5 to challenge the queen. No, that wasn't the idea at all. In this position, can you see what Fischer played? A wonderful move. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Rook F6, blocking that F pawn, totally blockading that pawn, leaving a blockade even with the opponent's piece if the opponent wants to take the bishop. So bishop takes F6, there will be E5, and it's impossible to stop the mate here on H7. This is a forced mate in 3. It's just no defense of the mate in 3 on H7. You know, rook G8, queen H7. Nothing. So black decided to play king G8. Now Fischer plays E5 anyway. Now H6 was played, tempting Fischer to release that blockade though by playing rook takes F6. Tempting, maybe, but this doesn't quite work. I think. Well, not as well as Fischer's continuation. F5 here, white still actually better after rook G6. But instead, Fischer just plays knight E2, and here black resigned. White can simply follow up at leisure now with like rook AF1 and rook takes H6 without any issues. What can black do here? So black kind of he resigned after this. If the knight moves back, the knight is attacked as well now. So if we move the knight back, actually queen f5. If the knight doesn't want to move back, I think we can just take the knight off, if nothing else. I think this will do. This is a big advantage. Or even more crushing, we can just build up the pressure. Rook a f1, and let black just be helpless here, and actually just come in for the kill with rook g3. I think next. Say this position, rook g3, and then we've got queen h6 and queen h7 coming up. So anyway, the beautiful move of this game was this rook, this idea of taking on d4 to gain an important tempo to open up this bishop on h7, potentially with e5, rook f6 here. Wonderful stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this selection of 8 what I call, I think, classic Fischer combinations and brilliant moves. And I'll try and put links to the relevant videos if you want to see the full games with detailed analysis to them. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.